Welcome to another Bible study and another probe into the lessons of biblical Hebrew. In Genesis chapter 12, we read of Abraham's Odyssey. Beginning of the chapter, the Lord said unto Abram, "Go you out of your land and from your kindred and from your father's house unto the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless you, and him that curses you will I curse. And in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed." And in verse 5, we read Abraham's response. "And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all the substance that they had gathered." In the Hebrew, "Ve'et hanefesh asher asu v'charan," often translated as the souls that they had gotten in Haran, except the Hebrew asu doesn't mean gotten. Asu is the past tense of asa. It means do or make. So we would better render this, all the souls that they had made in Haran. And they went forth into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. So of course, inevitably, the obvious question in our tradition, how do you make a soul? Well, of course, you could make a soul by having children, but Abraham and Sarah did not have any children at this point. So inevitably we appreciate that making souls in this vein doesn't only apply to biological offspring. Now we get something of a sense of Abraham's household in Genesis chapter 18, and we'll note that these verses are also before Abraham had Isaac and the family that would descend from Isaac, when in Genesis chapter 18, verses 17 and on, God says, "Shall I hide from Abraham that which I am doing, seeing that Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed in him? For I have known him to the end, that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice." So Abraham is commanding his household. And what we're reading then in Genesis chapter 12 is the beginnings of this household. While, again in Genesis chapter 18, verse 19, we read of his children, we appreciate that children aren't only biological children. In the prophets, we read in manifold contexts about, in the Hebrew, the B'nai HaNevi'im. We could translate that as sons of, or children of the prophets, but more properly, these are the disciples of the prophets, the apprentice prophets. In the second book of Kings, in chapter 2, we read about these bands of the disciples of the prophets. Again and again, the disciples of the prophets who were in Bethel, who were in Jericho, and so on. And conversely, we also appreciate, likewise, in the second book of Kings, chapter 2, that the disciples refer indeed to their mentors as their father, Elisha, when he sees Elijah being taken from him in a chariot of fire, in the whirlwind. In second book of Kings chapter 2 verse 12, cries out, my father, the chariots of Israel and the horsemen thereof." So again, Abraham's children at this stage don't necessarily mean biological children. But inevitably then, we have a major question. If these souls that Abraham and Sarah made in Haran are their disciples, proselytes, those whom they brought, as it were, beneath the canopy of God, what happened to them all? That is, we do read in Genesis chapter 14, verse 14, that when Abram heard that his brother, referring to Lot, was taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 people. But there's a vexing, glaring problem here. What happened to them all? In Genesis chapter 46, when we read of Jacob and his family descending to Egypt, we get a tally of exactly who that group comprises. And they are all Jacob's direct descendants. Likewise, in Exodus chapter 1, in both instances we read of the 70 that represent the house of Jacob, and we can count through each and every one as a direct descendant. So what happened to all these souls that Abraham and Sarah had made in Haran and their descendants? Let's add another couple of questions here, besides what happened to all these souls. You know, Abraham and Sarah were obviously not the first righteous people who were imbued with a sense of God. What happened to everyone who came before them? What happened to the righteous Noah? What happened to various righteous people whom we encounter in the generations that came before? Why weren't they involved in the same proselytization mission that Abraham and Sarah were engaged in? And maybe to add an additional question here, why is it that whenever God describes himself as God of the patriarchs, it's always God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? We're of course descended from all those who came before Abraham as well. But Abraham and Sarah are always named as the first patriarch and matriarch of Israel. I remember many, many years ago hearing an answer to all these questions that tied them all up together in one basic principle. If we ask ourselves, what happened to all these people whom Abraham and Sarah had made, had proselytized in Haran? Sadly, what happened to them was they all eventually backslid into paganism and oblivion. And so, by the time Jacob and his family are going down to Egypt, no one's left. Why were none of the righteous people who preceded Abraham and Sarah engaging in this mission of proselytization? Because they anticipated that's what would end up happening. It would accomplish nothing. Why are Abraham and Sarah considered the first patriarch and matriarch of Israel? Because they also appreciated that likely nothing in an ultimate abiding sense would remain of their efforts. But that didn't stop them. Because if this is the right thing to do, you do it, irrespective of any other considerations. That's what make Abraham and Sarah into the first holy patriarch and holy matriarch of Israel. And just consider this message, that in Genesis chapter 17, when God makes his second decisive covenant with Abraham, the summons that he gives him. And this is a prelude to making him the father of a multitude of nations, which are not necessarily going to be biological descendants, but Abraham becomes the spiritual father, really, of all the world. The summons that God gives Abraham, this is in Genesis chapter 17, verse 1, is go yourself before me. In the Hebrew, that's hit halech, which is a relatively rare conjugation of the verb to go. Again, we're rendering it as go yourself. The self-same conjugation also appears with respect to Noah. In Genesis chapter 6, in verse 9, where we read the description of Noah as a righteous man. Noah went himself with God. Noah goes with God. Abraham goes in front. God's summons to Abraham is to take the initiative, not merely to go along. And of course, tellingly, when God tells Noah a flood is coming to wipe out humanity, what does Noah do? Absolutely nothing other than build a boat. What about imploring God for compassion over his contemporaries? What about trying to get his contemporaries to return to God, to reform their ways? Noah's answer to God basically is, you told me to build a boat? Whatever you say, boss. Abraham, when he hears about the impending doom of Sodom and Gomorrah, gets into an argument with God, which was exactly what God wanted. So the important take-home message of all of this is, we have a job to do. And the job doesn't get defined in terms of what we will accomplish. We don't gauge whether something is right or wrong based upon results. We gauge whether something is right or wrong based upon whether it's right or wrong with God. Abraham and Sarah made those souls. What happened afterward is a different story. But if you can make a soul, don't hold back. If you can do something good, if you can have a positive impact on anyone around you, on the world that we share, don't hesitate for a moment. That's what we're here for. God bless you.